Gentlemen, welcome. Great to see you both. Lovely to have you here for the Menzies debate.
Thanks, Kieran.
Thank you.
We've had a toss of the coin, and Gabriel will speak first with the opening statements. Gabriel, to you.
Well, thanks, Kieran, and thanks, Keith, for agreeing to this debate. So my name is Gabriel Ng, and I'm the Labor candidate for Menzies. Now, I grew up in Doncaster, and I moved back to the area to raise a family because I know what a wonderful community it is and how much it has to offer. I'm standing because I want to be a strong voice for the community of Menzies, and I know how much a Labor government has achieved in this term of government with tax cuts for every taxpayer. We've got wages moving again, we've provided cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, and we've delivered Medicare urgent care clinics. A re-elected Albanese government will deliver on things that the people of Menzies care about. That's a record investment in Medicare, which means that all Australians will be able to see a bulk billing GP again. We'll make big investments in our fantastic local schools, and will provide more tax cuts, more energy bill relief, and will help young Australians get into the housing market with our 5% deposit guarantee. The Albanese Labor government will continue to build Australia's future, and the Liberals will drag Australia backwards.
Gabriel, thank you. Keith Wallahan, to you.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you, Gabriel. I really appreciate how we've conducted ourselves in this campaign, and lovely meeting your family as well. Like so many in Menzies, I wasn't born here. My parents chose Melbourne, and they chose it out of all of the cities on earth because it was a city that stood for aspiration and hope. We didn't have much, but we never wanted for anything. We had all that we needed. I went to good public schools. I worked part-time at McDonald's. And through good teachers and the opportunity that I was given, I got to be the first in my family to go to university. I had the privilege of commanding soldiers in combat, and I ran trials in a courtroom. But all of that hope and that aspiration is now at risk under double Labor. In double Labor in Victoria, we have seen all of the key metrics go backwards, whether it's increased taxes, whether it's crime, whether it is debt, and it's a lack of productivity. Melbourne isn't at its best. And if you're not from Melbourne, if you were to come here, what you would see is graffiti on just about every sign, rubbish on the side of the streets, and CFMEU flags flying on the cranes, in a way that says they own this town. It's not their town. It's the people of Melbourne's town. So in this election, double Labor is asking you to take that national, to take Spring Street to Canberra. And we're warning you that from here, it hasn't been good, and that isn't good for Victorians. When we say, let's get our nation back on track, it's actually a message of hope. Okay. It's not a slogan.
Keith Wallahan, Gabriel Ng, thank you, gents, for the opening remarks. You both, I'm not telling you anything, you both know. The main issue this campaign for your voters, for constituents, is cost of living. People are struggling. Our reporters that have been in Menzies over recent days will have some comments from the voters a bit later, but it's clear that people are struggling. Let me start with you, Keith. Tax offset, temporary. Fuel excise reduction, temporary. Given Mr Dutton's argument that we have had the largest fall in standard of living, 8% reduction in the developed world, are temporary efforts good enough?
Well, the first thing to acknowledge is the collapse in living standards. I remember the early 90s recession. It's actually worse here in Victoria. The average family is down $11,000. If you have a mortgage, you're paying $50,000 more. Now, that's after-tax income. Families don't have that lying around. And we talk about a 30% increase in groceries, but let's put that in real terms. Many families describe going to the checkout and they'll say the goods that they hold in their hands, they used to put in a basket. They don't get much change from $50 or $100 anymore. And there's two ways that you can look at it, and they're both important. One is to provide that immediate non-inflationary relief, and that's what that 25 cents reduction in petrol is designed to do. The other is to provide that $1,200 relief in the tax offset. But we can't just look at the symptoms of inflation. We need to look at the causes. And the causes is a blowout in government spending. Government spending before COVID was 22% of GDP. It's now at 28% of GDP. So we need to look at the structural causes, because otherwise we're trying to mop up the floor when we still have the tap on.
There have been a lot of distractions in this campaign, lots of international events we'll get to a bit later in our discussion. But the underlying point that Peter Dutton has made, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of voters in Menzies, is the question, are you better today than you were 3 years ago? And the vast bulk of people are saying no, and no in a big way. That's right, isn't it?
Well, look, we know that people are doing it tough, and that's why we've provided targeted cost of living relief through things like energy bill relief, through tax cuts, and that's why we'll provide permanent cost of living relief through further tax cuts. So people across Menzies will be a further, on average, $2,700 better off as a result of our tax cuts. And that's in the long term. It's not just a pre-election sugar hit. We also have our $1,000 instant tax write-off, which means that people in Menzies will have permanent structural simplifying of the tax system. They won't have to get all their receipts together at tax time. They'll just be able to instantly write those taxes off. And have more in their pocket.
When you're door knocking, and I know you've been, as Keith has, door knocking across the suburbs of Menzies over recent weeks and months, it must be moving to hear some of the stories about how much people are struggling right now. Is that the case when you go door to door?
Oh, look, we absolutely, yeah. As you say, I've done thousands of door knocks across Menzies now, and it's been a real privilege to get to hear from the community. And we know, as I say, that people are doing it tough. So they've really welcomed
those measures,
our cost.
So those measures, how do they go down with those voters, given how much people have been struggling?
Yeah, so when we let people know, for example, about our energy bill relief, we tell them to have a look on their electricity bill, see that $75 line. They really welcome that. And they also really welcome our record investment in Medicare, which means they'll be able to see a bulk billing GP for free again, because they've seen the decline in bulk billing GPs after 9 years of Liberal neglect. And that means they'll have less out-of-pocket costs. They know how expensive it is when you've got kids and you've got to go to the doctor every other week. So all of our policies are really being welcomed when we let people know about them, because people are doing it tough and because we're addressing the issues that matter to them.
I don't know if we're knocking on the same doors, Gabriel, but when I knock on the doors, more often than not, in the hallway table is a pile of unopened bills. And the reason they're unopened is because they are a cause of stress for families. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're trying to put food on the table, send their kids to school, and hope that that default notice that's sitting there isn't going to be opened. That's what I see when I knock on the doors. And that's why we've seen a collapse in living standards here that is worse than the early 90s. Families are barely surviving, and giving $10 with one hand and taking $100 away with the other isn't going to cut it.
When you look at your cost of living measures, though, and I know that this is an issue in your part of Melbourne, working from home, people have embraced that since COVID. With the measure that was put up, and I know that Mr Dutton's put a line under it, there's no movement on that. But did you feel blowback on that when it was raised? It was working from home changes for public servants. But I've spoke to a number of candidates around the country, Liberals inside the party as well, saying this did have a negative impact. Did it undermine your broader argument on cost of living? Because if you had to go into the office 5 days a week, people then have to stump up more in terms of public transport or petrol.
It was certainly lost in translation, and that happens in politics, and it was never the intent of the original policy to apply to the private sector or outside of Canberra. But people didn't see it that way. So absolutely, that's why Peter walked it back, and that showed leadership and courage by Peter. He will own up and listen to people when something is misinterpreted, and that's what happened. And
so
I agree.
When you say misinterpreted, do you think that fundamental policy is still a good policy, that they should rein in work from home?
No, I fundamentally believe that for families today, and it's not a COVID thing, it's how we live today, I think there is a sweet spot for flexibility. And Gabriel and I, we go to train stations, and if you go on a Monday or a Friday, they're mostly empty, because a lot of people value that flexibility. I value it, my family values it, and I think people in Melbourne value it. And I'll tell you why, because getting in and out of this city is horrendous. So when families can work from home, it is actually a sweet spot of lifting productivity in this city, and I do cherish it, and the Coalition cherishes it.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think that people value working from home, and I think it's really concerning that the Liberal Party thought that it was appropriate to stop people working from home. Because I've knocked on a lot of doors. Of course, you find people who are at that time working from home. And the idea of, we've just gotten through school holidays. A lot of parents use that to balance caring responsibilities when their kids aren't so young. They need to be watched every minute, but aren't so old that they can stay home by themselves.
But Gabriel, you haven't qualified that. It was never the intent to apply in our seat or in Melbourne, never. And you know that, so it wasn't an issue in Menzies.
Well, initially, Peter Dutton said that it would apply only to public servants, not only in Canberra, but to public servants. And then he qualified that, and now he's done a complete backflip. But the point I'd make is that the public service sends a signal to the private sector about what's appropriate, and the public service competes with workers with the private sector. So saying that you're going to have all public servants that aren't allowed to work from home, that are in the office 5 days a week, does reflect the Liberal Party's values, and that the Liberal Party is out of touch with exactly the kind of values that you're talking about with flexible work. And another point I'd make, Keith, is that sometimes you say that you will speak out against your party when you don't agree with them. Well, it sounds like you really support working from home, but you didn't speak out.
No, I think you verbaled me there. I think I was quite clear in Kieran that I value working from home and the flexibility that it brings. I always have. And I think it's quite clear from the press that many members in seats like mine felt that feedback straight away. So that's what we do in our parties, and I know you do it in your party. Parties are places where we actually work through this. We listen to our electorates. We don't just do what we're told, we feed it in, and that certainly happened in my case.
When you look at the fuel excise reduction, this is something that I'm sure you've had positive feedback on. As a candidate, would you have hoped the Treasurer would have given that a tick, a reduction in fuel excise? Because that is a big part of people hurting every time they go to the Bowser.
Look, this is just a recycled policy from the Scott Morrison era. We're providing permanent cost of living relief that makes structural changes. That's a $1,000 instant tax write-off, and permanent tax cuts.
70 cents a day in 15 months is not tax relief, and many families drive to work from Menzies, or they drive to school and they drive to sport. They will notice when they are filling up at the petrol tank.
So that's been well received?
It has absolutely been well received. Because
we're not talking sort of, for those that don't know Melbourne, Menzies isn't, we're not talking the outer suburbs, it's not the inner city, but
no.
People still will be driving enough to feel that.
It's often spoken of as a place where the city meets the country, because it goes from Box Hill and Blackburn South and Surrey Hills through to Warrandyte, which is like a country town.
Okay, so it sort of is.
Many families rely on their car.
It comes up to Kooyong as well in the eastern suburbs.
Yeah, right next to it.
But still lots of people in their car a lot each week.
Yes.
OK, well, let's move on to the second topic of the debate, housing. Both your parties have outlined competing visions here. The Liberals are promising tax-deductible mortgages for first-home buyers, while Labor is expanding Help to Buy so Menzies voters can co-own their home with the government for as little as 5%. Sky News hit the streets of Menzies to hear what the views are on housing.
Hi, I'd just like to ask our politicians how they're going to help our children get into housing in the future, so everything's so expensive, and just to get into the market is really difficult for them. And, as a father with kids living at home, I just wonder whether they're ever going to leave.
I'd like to ask the political candidates how they plan to make housing cheaper, because at the moment, as a young person, this is really important to me, and I'm planning on buying a house next year, so I'd really like to know.
Let's go to Keith first of all here. One of the questions has been the criticism of both policies, including the 5% deposit guarantee for Labor and the expansion of that, and your tax-deductible first mortgages, that it just will boost the demand. And the problem is with housing, we need more supply, as you well know.
We do, and let's recognise the scale of the problem. My parents chose Melbourne because it was a place of aspiration and hope. We are now hearing, and I'm certainly hearing from families who are worrying whether their children will have to marry well in order to have a home. That's not the Melbourne we know and love. It's a place where if you work hard, take a risk, you will be rewarded. And housing is central to that. So who we are as a nation is at stake with this topic, and we need to make sure that we boost supply. That's the most important lever that we do, but also tip the hand of first home buyers. And there's many policies that we have put forward, but I'm particularly excited about the $5 billion infrastructure fund that we have put forward. What that is doing, it is turbocharging the private sector to build the houses that we need. And that, more than anything, will allow more families to get into the housing market.
And what do you say to those voters that we heard from before?
Look, we're investing more in housing than any government since World War II, $43 billion. So we'll make sure that young people, like the young lady in that video, will be able to get into housing sooner with the 5% deposit guarantee, because instead of having to save for a decade, she'll be able to save for a couple of years, and then the government will support her to be able to get into her first home. And now, in addition to this, we are also addressing the supply side. We've got an ambitious target working with the states and territories to build 1.2 million new homes. As well, we'll have 100,000 homes that are set aside just for first home buyers. Again, I go to both policies here. Is it the challenge, though, the workforce? That anyone that's done work around the house or tries to build a house at the moment, we still have
challenge with getting enough houses built and in the sort of time frame that you're talking about?
Well, that's why we have fee-free TAFE to train up as many Australians as possible into construction work, as well as $10,000 for apprentices, which will also provide cost of living relief, but ensure that they're able to finish their apprenticeships in construction and will increase the workforce in that way. And that's a program that the Liberals have said that they'll cut.
So there's two things I'd like to say that matter right now for housing. One is that we have seen the 10-year average of net overseas migration, which was 220,000 average a year, go to 500,000 a year. Many of that surge in migrants has come to Melbourne. And I'm a migrant and the seat is mostly migrants, but it's migrant families who are telling me that that is putting pressure on this state. We also have a tax that everyone pays, which is the CFMEU tax on all construction in Victoria. And again, those flags are flying throughout this town, even after that disgraceful footage that we've seen of women and other people being abused at work sites. So we need to make sure that construction is affordable and it's built in an efficient way. And right now, again, with double labour, the cost of construction is out of control, and we will bring migration down to a proportionate number.
Is that an issue for you? I know Keith mentions the CFMEU, but the Victorian government particularly is on the nose. Are people differentiating between federal and state, or is that hurting the Labor brand right now?
I think the people of Menzies are educated and well informed. They can differentiate between state and federal issues. And so they know that the federal government is helping them with things like housing through the policies that I've mentioned.
I want to bring this graphic up and get your reaction to it. PropTrack, they're our colleagues at realestate.com.au that have come up with this data. It shows Menzies recorded the biggest decline in apartment values nationwide since the Albanese government came to power. Median unit prices dropped by about $90,000 in both Menzies and in Kooyong in the last 3 years, an 11% decline. Gabrielle, first to you, do you think, obviously people want more affordable property, but do you see that as a good thing?
Oh, look, there is a trend for, generally, for house prices to increase gradually. And so, while we want people to have good return on their investments, we also want people to be able to get into housing. Our priority is to get young people into houses.
So what's your read on that? Do you think, as Gabrielle says, I know it's your Liberal priority as well, is to get first home buyers in, is seeing a moderation like that or even a dip, is that encouraging to first home buyers, even though for the property owners themselves, it might cause a bit of pain?
Well, I think if you go to Menzies, you'll see pockets of areas that have high density development, particularly like Box Hill and Doncaster. And for some people, students or retirees, that is what they are after. But when you speak to families, when they are looking for family-friendly housing, that's not the answer for them. And I know planning is a state issue, but this state government has a plan for high density development throughout Melbourne. And we've seen in those particular pockets, it's not family-friendly and it's not what families are looking for. We need to find affordable, family-friendly housing.
Do you think that state brand is hurting?
Absolutely, because where Victoria goes, the nation will follow. If you look at the party room, the caucus for federal Labor, the largest group are Victorian federal Labor. And Gabriel is a decent person, but he's asking to add one more to a party room that is already dominated by them. They are cut from the same cloth. So if you want to see where a second-term Albanese government is going to go, look to the second and third term.
Well, why don't you ask, we'll take this opportunity to ask each other a question now. It's that time of the debate, our Menzies debate. It's great to have your company on Sky News for our Battleground debate here this afternoon. I want to get a question from you to each other. We can start with Gabrielle to Keith.
Sure. Well, Keith, as I said before, you have said in the past that you would vote against your party room. We've talked about how people in Menzies have been doing it tough with cost of living, and we've provided a range of cost of living relief measures like energy bill relief, like tax cuts, like pay increases for some of our lowest paid workers but most deserving of a pay increase, like childcare workers and aged care workers. These are all measures that you've voted against. So where were you for the people of Menzies in the last 3 years when you voted against those measures? OK,
well, I'm not someone who says I would vote against my party. Like all parties, we work within our party system. But there's a lot of performative voting that goes on in the parliament, and you know that, Gabriel, where a bill has some elements that are thrown into it that are not in the national interest. So we will put forward amendments and we won't vote for those. But this is the fundamental problem with this Labor government, constantly addressing the symptoms of inflation and not the causes. Peter Dutton is serious about addressing the causes of inflation, and we have never seen in any of the bills that have been put forward an actual commitment to address that. That is why government spending has gone from 22% of GDP pre-COVID to 28%. So we're not going to vote for a bad bill, and I'm proud that I didn't vote for those.
Well, look, on the topic of inflation, you know that when we came into government, inflation was at 6.1%. Now it's at 2.4%, within the Reserve Bank of Australia's range, and that's why they've started to lower interest rates.
If the premise of that question is that, you know, things are fine and everyone's doing well, I look forward to you saying that on the doors when you go door knocking this weekend. That is just not the case of families.
Let's get your question now.
Yeah, well, my question is, you are asking Victorians to vote for double Labor again, to continue the status quo. When we look at the state metrics that matter, whether it's tax, crime, productivity or debt, can you name one that has improved under this state Labor government?
Well, look, we're standing for federal seats, and so I know that you would like to divert attention away from some of your party's policies and backflips to state Labor. But the reality is that we have lower taxes, something you voted against. We'll lower taxes again, and that's something that you would repeal. Now, on crime, look, I recognise a lot of voters have raised that with me, and I've listened to them, and I think it's really important that all levels of government work together on crime. And so I welcome that the state Labor government has reformed the bail laws to address some of those recidivist offenders who were committing a lot of the crimes, burglaries, that voters in Menzies were concerned about.
I'll help you with the answer. None of those have gone forward. They've all gone backwards. And that's what you're asking Australians to do, to take that record national. And it's not in Australia's interests, and we will trust the Labor Party by what they do, not what they say. That's what matters in elections.
Well, look, in terms of economic management, you would know at the federal level we've delivered 2 budget surpluses and we've halved the deficit. So I think our record does speak for itself.
$1.2 trillion of debt, which is $37,000 interest on payments for every family in Australia.
We use the surpluses that we delivered to pay down debt. And so we have a good record on economic management.
28% of GDP is no plan to pay down.
I want to move on to a third topic now. It's dominating debate in Victoria, specifically, though, in the seat of Menzies that Gabrielle and Keith are vying for. It's Labor's suburban rail loop versus the Coalition's support solely for an airport rail link. The Coalition promises to cancel more than $2 billion in federal funding for the suburban rail loop that goes through Box Hill in Menzies and instead redirect billions to prioritise the long-awaited Melbourne Airport rail link. When we spoke to Menzies voters on the issue, they were critical and somewhat open-minded for some of them, but some of them have made up their mind.
What's your thoughts on Jacinta Allen?
She should resign now.
And what do you think of the SRL being built over there just behind us?
I think it's disgusting. The amount of money going into that is disgusting.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty expensive, but we'll just have to wait and see if it has been worth it.
Yeah, it's a project going straight through Menzies. How is it received? Because looking at it from a state level, it seems like it is polarising voters at the very least.
Look, I've knocked on plenty of doors where people tell me they just want it to get finished. So when I was young, growing up in Doncaster and going to uni out in Clayton, I would have loved to be able to catch a train all the way there instead of having to catch 2 or 3 buses for an hour to an hour and a half. I think it's really important that we have better connectivity between our suburbs. And the Liberal Party have said that they're going to rip $2.2 billion out of the suburban rail loop instead, they're also going to rip $500 million out of the airport rail link to deliver a second-rate Sunshine Station that won't provide linkages to some of our growth corridors in Melbourne's west and won't provide linkages to our regional areas through the V-Line trains. So that's $2.7 billion in cuts to Victorian infrastructure, and that just reflects the Liberal Party's trend of dudding Victoria on infrastructure spending and dudding Victoria on our fair share of the GST.
And anyone that's been in Sydney lately will tell you that the infrastructure built in large part by the Liberal government at the state level through O'Farrell and Baird and Berejiklian is making a massive difference to that city. Shouldn't you be getting on board with the suburban rail loop and the airport link and connect that infrastructure to modernise this great city to be, to ensure that transport matches the international city that this place is?
Melbourne absolutely needs better public transport, but the SRL is not it. It is a fantasy. My dad, as I said, is a tradesman, a roof plumber. He always says to me, you measure twice and you cut once. This project was never properly assessed. And it's a $200 billion fantasy. When you go through the full route all the way through to the airport, it's not going to be finished until 2053 on their own assessment. And it's going to cost over $200 billion. The state cannot afford it. And really, it's not actually a transport plan. When you look at the detail of it, whatever there is, it's actually a high-density development plan pretending to be a transport solution. Melbourne actually needs real transport solutions. This isn't it. So what we have put on the table...
But this is a dilemma because the construction has begun. The state election's not until November next year. A $36 billion initiative. What do you do if you're elected and they crack on with the project? Do you just let it become a hole in the ground?
Oh, well, no, not at all. So this is why my state colleagues have quite properly called on the Allen government to pause it. Don't sign Victorians up to something that will cost them billions. But in the transport, we've put $25 million towards an all-option transport study for Melbourne's East. And in that, it will assess all options, including heavy rail, light rail, rapid bus, connected bike tracks, such as from Hawthorn to Box Hill, as well as keeping the parks. This project sees Whitehorse Council potentially losing up to 15 MCGs of open space. So what makes Melbourne Melbourne is its beautiful tree canopy and its parks. All of those are at risk from this project, and it's all because it is a fantasy done on the back of a napkin.
A state project, but it does have federal funding. That's the reality, doesn't it? Or should have. I don't think any money's flowed yet, but $2 billion plus committed by the Albanese government.
Yes, that's correct. And so I think that people in Menzies and people in Victoria want a government with vision. Now, you would acknowledge we have population growth already in Menzies and across Victoria.
Thanks to Labor, yes.
We need infrastructure to be able to continue to work with that population growth. I don't think a $25 million plan to go back to the drawing board is what Victorians need. We already have shovels in the ground for the SRL. People tell me they just want to get it finished. A $25 million plan would just delay any progress that we're making on infrastructure spending. You don't need a plan to tell you what the people of Melbourne need. We've already gotten started on it. It's connectivity between our suburbs and the economic opportunities that brings. And, for example, the importance of to people in Menzies of a good education, being able to get to the universities from Box Hill, from ultimately Doncaster.
It is criminally irresponsible to put Victorians on the line, on the contractual line for a project of this scale, this cost and this timeline without doing a plan. So we're actually doing the homework that the Labor government never did, which is to do an all-options feasibility study. And in doing that, it will also consider the contracts and the sunk costs that have been considered for the works already. And of course they can be incorporated into any plan. But again, I call on the state Labor government, and Gabriel, I call on you to ask your state colleagues. You say federal Labor and state Labor are different. Well, this is a chance to show it. Like Infrastructure Australia has sounded the alarm bell on this project, and the federal Labor government is not listening.
Well, we have listened to Infrastructure Australia, and Infrastructure Australia have requested further information from the state government, which have already provided detailed
and an exit plan. They're saying, what's your exit plan to get out of it? They can see it's going to fail.
But no, they've asked for some further information. The state government will provide that further information, and then we'll reconsider further federal funding after that's provided. We listen to the advice of independent bodies like Infrastructure Australia, and we respect the advice of public servants, unlike the Liberal Party that says it will cut the public service by 41,000 public servants.
On to the final topic of our debate, our Menzies debate, Australia-China relations, because for the first time this year, Menzies has the most Chinese Australian voters. The AEC redistribution shifted Box Hill and its high Chinese Australian population from Chisholm into Menzies. And for many of those voters, relations between our two nations is a priority. Keith Wallahan, this was a problem for the Liberal Party at the last election. The swing against the Liberal government was double in seats with a high percentage of Chinese Australians than the national average. Has Peter Dutton, has the Liberal Party got that relationship back on an even keel? Not with China, but with Chinese Australians?
So every election you get sent messages, and a message that was sent to the Liberal Party, clearly there was a disconnect between us and the Chinese diaspora. And I think part of it was we didn't lean forward enough to say how grateful we are to their contributions, because there are 1.4 million Chinese Australians in this country, 29% on the ABS statistics for Menzies. But let's not forget this, Chinese Australians are Australians. So all those economic issues like crime, tax, debt, lack of productivity, they're all the issues that they are raising and they are concerned about. So Labor keeps wanting to pivot from those issues to the relationship.
Peter Dutton and your party would be able to keep the trade and the broader relationship on an even keel as it has been under the Albanese government?
Absolutely. All governments of all persuasions act in the national interest and according to values. And the previous coalition government will, and Prime Minister Peter Dutton will. And Peter Dutton has said he would like to see trade with China double. And that becomes more of an imperative when we're seeing these trade wars overseas. Australia is a prosperous, safe nation because of trade. Trade is in our interests, and that's what's important. So we would like to see trade double with China, and that is something Peter has welcomed throughout this chat.
Is this something you've picked up from the Chinese Australian population in Menzies, that things have settled when it comes to their view towards the Liberal Party?
Well, look, the first point I'd make is that the Chinese Australian population in Menzies and across Australia is diverse. So there's, of course, mainland Chinese, there's Chinese Australians who are from Hong Kong, from Malaysia, or like my dad, who are Chinese Singaporeans. But I don't think that a lot of Chinese Australians have forgotten the way that the previous government wrecked the relationship with China and made so much damage to our trade relationships. And trade is so important to Australia. 1 in 4 jobs depend on trade, and a quarter of that trade depends on China. So I think...
Sorry, Gabriel, do you really consider that was all Australia's fault, that the trade relationship was sour? Do you really believe that? Or is that just a talking point to win elections?
I think it was mismanagement by the then Morrison government that resulted in those broken trade ties that meant that the former Liberal government couldn't even pick up the phone at the ministerial level.
And how's that going for the Prime Minister speaking to Donald Trump? How is that going?
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about China in this case. I mean, the Prime Minister
using it for particular domestic purposes when it's convenient, and it's quite selective.
Well, look, I think Chinese Australians know that the tone set by the leader of the government or the tone set by the leader of the party is really important. And, I mean, regardless of your background, if you're Chinese Australian, the relationship between China and Australia does have a direct impact. And I don't think that Chinese Australians have forgotten the way that the previous government acted towards China. And I don't think the Chinese Australians have forgotten that Peter Dutton, when he was Defence Minister, talked about the drumbeats of war.
He never said that. Sorry, Gabriel, that is a lie that is peddled throughout the Chinese community. It was said by a departmental secretary in a memo that was leaked to The Australian, a departmental secretary that was employed by the federal Labor government. It's a lie that you peddle because it's convenient. And at its heart is this idea that when we boost our defence force, which is what we're talking about today, it is about anything other than deterrence. And I've served in war, Gabriel, and I don't want to see us go to war ever. But the only way to do that is to make sure that any potential adversaries from any country wake up and say, not today.
So is that policy today about China?
No, that policy is about our interests and our values, and any potential adversary around the world saying, not today. That's what it is about. It's not about the drums of war. It's not about that. And it's really actually quite disgraceful that is peddled in the community. You see it on tiles, you see it in speeches given by Labor Party members, and it's a very self-serving one that is not true and harms our national interests.
You have said that the only way to avoid war is with deterrence.
Yes.
And we have taken a diplomatic approach to building stronger ties with China, to building stronger ties with the Pacific, and building stronger ties with our region, with Southeast Asia, with India. This is also a really important way of avoiding war.
Absolutely.
And Peter Dutton doesn't have the disposition. He is shoot from the hip. We've seen that just in the past couple of weeks in his verballing of the Indonesian Prime Minister. He said he would fight Donald Trump, whatever that means. He put defence on the table in our trade dispute with the US. So he's demonstrated that he doesn't have the nuance and the disposition to be able to deal with the complexity of our current international...
Was that a bad call?
No, not at all. No, so Peter Dutton knows that, of course, you leverage your diplomatic soft power relationships. We always have as a government, but you also deter through strength. That's how international relations and defence actually works. We need to have a defence force that reflects the statements made by the Prime Minister. He's saying we live in the most contested strategic environment since World War II, yet we're not spending on defence that reflects that. We want a Prime Minister who's going to be serious. The Prime Minister's not serious about this, but yet Peter Dutton will be.
OK,
we've increased
just quickly, yeah, if you can,
we've increased defence spending by $57 billion, and we'll increase defence spending as a share of GDP to 2.3%.
Gabrielle, you spoke first this afternoon. It's your opportunity for your closing statements as we wrap up. You kick off with your closing remarks, please.
Well, thank you, Kieran, and thank you, Keith, for what I think has been a really interesting debate and respectfully conducted, as we have throughout this campaign. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I've had thousands of conversations, as I've said, with voters across Menzies, and I know the issues that are important to them. They want to see more bulk billing GPs so they can go and see a doctor for free when they need it. They want more tax cuts, more energy bill relief, better funded public schools, and for young people to be able to get into the housing market with our 5% deposit guarantee. The voters of Menzies face a really important choice at this election. Menzies has been a Liberal seat for as long as it's existed, and that means in a lot of ways that it's been taken for granted. The people of Menzies need a strong local voice, a strong Labor voice, not another Liberal Party member who will vote along Peter Dutton's party lines. So I ask you to vote for the Labor Party on the 3rd of May or before. Pre-polls open now, and I hope to see you and meet you down at the booth.
Gabrielle Ng, thank you. Keith Wallahan.
No, thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you, Kieran. I still remember the early 90s, what it was like when we were paying record interest rates and struggling to put food on the table. It's worse now, but it doesn't have to be that way. Imagine Melbourne 10 years from now. You're going from the city out to Menzies on the Eastern Freeway. There's no graffitis on the sign. There's no rubbish on the side of the road. On either side of that freeway, Melbourne still has its tree canopy and parks because we've managed migration and we have managed to build the infrastructure that is required to keep Melbourne, Melbourne, the Melbourne that we know and love. When we think about Australia, it's easy to think about the things that matter, which is our beautiful environment, our institutions and our freedoms. But Australia is more than that. It's about its people, and its people are looking for hope. And this Anzac Day, it's a bipartisan thing that both parties will celebrate and mark Anzac Day. We should remember this is a country, beyond this election, that is a country worth fighting for because people always have fought for it.
And I love the fact that as part of our democracy, we get to come together and have our discussion this afternoon. Thank you both for making the time. I know you're busy on the pre-poll booths. What time is it? You'll be back out there.
Yeah.
Get the sand shoes out there and hand out the how to vote cards. Thank you both. And that's it.
Thank you.